Welcome to our latest Rebels of the Heart. Excited for our guest today is a friend of mine, Carson Kelly. It's exciting to have you here, and I know you're going to share a lot of great wisdom and heart with our audience. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I look forward to this.
Likewise. So we'll jump in to kind of an easy topic. You and I have talked at length about what it is to be a rebel with a heart. Um, I know the work that you're doing in the world and the different facets around it. Would you be so kind as to share a little bit about the impetus for why you do what you do and how that aligns with being a rebel with a heart?
Sure. Sure. I'll go way back. So in college, I was studying contemporary German and French philosophy and working at a New Age bookstore at the time. And it was quite a difference to be selling books on like UFOs and crystals and, the Dolphin Sedona warrior and so forth, and studying like German philosophy. It was a trip, but it was fun. It was good. But I think the most important thing that I came away from that particular job as a young person was people coming into the store and they were searching for things to make themselves better, to deal with pain that they were experiencing, a variety of different motivations. And not that I held any innate wisdom per se, but I was in a store that held the wisdom. So I was able to put books in people's hands and help them with, particular things that they were looking for. And it felt good. It felt really good. Subsequently, I thought I was going to become a philosophy professor and realized quickly I didn't want to do that. So being in the Silicon Valley area, I took advantage of a startup opportunity back in 1998, 1999, helping small businesses come online and sell through eBay, back when eBay had 100 employees and the internet was just, brand spanking new.
Yeah.
So I did that for a while and then made my way into enterprise software tech. In parallel, I was always involved with Mount Madonna Center, which is a big yogic retreat center here in the Santa Cruz Mountains where I live. My wife grew up there and they would hold conferences and they were doing all kinds of groovy things. And I was on some of the business advisory boards. I was on the board of directors for a short time, so forth. So I was selling software, but I kind of kept one foot into the world of, the business of helping people, so to speak, for a lack of a better frame. And did that for a long time. But I always felt this pulling back to wanting to have my primary business activities go towards some sort of right livelihood. And I struggled with that. I didn't really know exactly what that was going to look like and so on. So fast forward, a friend of mine got into some tech with me. He had been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, and he was in the social venture space and just a real rock star when it came to his career. He did just incredible things and unfortunately was given this diagnosis at 53 years old. So it was terribly unfortunate, but we decided to do the project together that we'd always wanted to do. And it was time to do it because of this diagnosis. So we created a platform for acts of altruism called Benevolently. And the idea is to provide opportunities for maybe 30 minutes to an hour for people who would like to help but don't really know where to start, how to go about it. A lot of the traditional methods by which people volunteer are, not really approachable by some of the younger generation. They're not familiar with the Rotary Club, or they're just not as actively engaged in maybe their church, like that might have been happening, many, many years ago, and so forth. So we noticed that. So we set this up. Then COVID hit and we had to retool, and unfortunately his decline resulted in him passing. So that was a difficult time, but needless to say, I made this jump and I've been doing other projects subsequently. And as I turned 50 last year, I realized that for me, my personal mission that's become clear to me is to figure out how to scale compassion. So that's what I'm trying to do, is to figure out how to use technologies and different touch points, so to speak, to get compassionate activities available to people.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that story, that winding road.
Yeah.
We have the commonality of studying philosophy, which is another fun thing. You don't meet too many philosophy majors, if you will. Why did you choose philosophy, out of curiosity, as a study?
Sure. I had an experience on a river rafting trip when I was in high school that, needless to say, really made me open my eyes. The boat dumped. It was a class 5 rapid. I'd never been on a river before, and it was terrifying to say the least. And coming out of that experience, the guides thought I had drowned essentially. And coming out of that experience, I just took another look through my 17-year-old eyes growing up in Marin County, like, maybe there's some more to this than I've understood up to this point. So I started studying as synchronicity would have it. Being in high school, one of my next English teachers at the time taught us about the Tao Te Ching, as well as the Tao of Pu. And he introduced us to Cat Stevens and Harold and Maude, and, just really fantastic, what I call kind of spiritual 101 material. And my mind was ripe and open for it. So fast forward, I'd been recruited to go to the USC Film School as a freshman. But by the time I got to USC, I changed my major to Eastern philosophy and wanted to study that full time. So I started learning Chinese and so forth. And then I got my first paper back when I was a freshman on writing on Taoism, and I got like a C+ because I didn't cite enough academic resources, and it wasn't scholarly, right? So I realized very quickly, wait a minute, the academy is the Western institution, and I don't necessarily want to study these very personal Eastern philosophical interests that I have within the framework of the academy. Yeah. I'll just do it personally. So I switched over to what I thought was more appropriate and studied Western philosophy. And so then I transferred and wound up finishing my degree at University of California, Santa Cruz. But and for some reason, I don't know why, maybe it's, self-pain, but I really enjoyed studying the Germans, studied a lot of Nietzsche, a lot of Heidegger, and then also the French too, Foucault. So anyway, that was my life for a couple of years. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, we have some more commonality there, both as we talked about this before, but I always love hearing about that. Where did the desire to help people, if you will, come from in your business pursuits, right? We have some similarities there too, in terms of, having traditional business, and yet a kind of really underlying desire and, yearning to make an impact and to do business differently. Where'd that come from for you?
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never thought about that explicitly. I think that came from probably, again, really two places. The first of which was experiencing in the bookstore and seeing people come in. I have many stories I could tell, but here's one example. A man came in and started drawing all these symbols on the piece of paper, and he put them in front of me and he said, "Do you know what these are?" And I said, "Well, yes, they're, hermetic-based alchemy symbols that, they used to use to metaphorically transform oneself from base metal to gold." And, there was this, framework of doing that. And then he says to me, "Well, I'm a Catholic, and I've been a Catholic for all of my life. I've been a choir boy, and I've been deeply involved in the church. I've never seen these symbols before, and my life is, quite frankly, kind of falling apart. So can you help me?" Right. So I gave him some books and pointed to some directions, and then subsequently met him later. And, he had found a group of people to work with and so forth. It was much, much calmer at that point in time. So that experience, plus many others, I think could see that I'm in this business retail environment providing material, and we're making money doing it, because making money is an important thing to do in business, because value is demonstrated and, it's real and tangible and so forth. So I think it came from there. And then I think it also combined with the fact that life is short, and there's only, I think one of my favorite people told me, you only have so many heartbeats in a given life. And so the question to me became, well, how am I going to use those heartbeats, right? What can I do? And what are my kind of unique skills that I might have, and my experience has brought me forward with, that allow me to then be able to combine business and helping people. But I would also say, as I say that too, I also realize I got a lot of inspiration from my partner in Benevolently, because he just did incredible work in the social enterprise space. So he was also a model.
Great. So, and that kind of leads into my next question, kind of two-parter. You mentioned turning 50. You mentioned the influence of him and the loss of him. And again, I'm deeply sorry for that loss.
Sure. Thank you.
What shifted for you, over the last couple of years into turning 50, that you really refined or defined your purpose so clearly or differently than you had previously, about the concept of scaling compassion?
Yeah.
And what you changed as a result of that profundity, for lack of a better term?
Yeah. Thank you. Great question. I think it was a a series of events that happened when we were starting benevolently and so forth. One of the things that I've been involved with is at Mount Madonna School, which is located at Mount Madonna Center. My wife was a co-teacher for many years and now the head teacher of something called Values and World Thought. And this is a little tiny class. The entire school from K through 12 has roughly 180 kids in it. And this class is taught to the seniors and juniors, but the travel is primarily now for the seniors. But His Holiness the Dalai Lama had invited the class to Dharamshala on 4 different occasions to that point to talk to him about the nature of happiness. So my wife went on these trips. Desmond Tutu did the same thing. I've been on the board of the school for many years. I've been, of course, participant indirectly in these trips and supporting them. We built some applications, as a matter of fact. The kids built some applications with me and presented them to the Dalai Lama. But in 2019, I had the opportunity to go on the trip to India and to also get the 5th interview with the Dalai Lama. And it was in one of those moments where I had to go, and the place I was working for at the time was really reluctant to let me go. So I had this moment of like, keep working here or go visit the Dalai Lama. So the answer itself became clear, and I basically said, so I'm going to India for the next 2 weeks, and I'm going to go and do this, and I'll be happy to do work remotely while I'm there, which I did. But I'm not going to pass up this opportunity. So once getting to India, which I had never been to before, I fell in love immediately. It's an incredible country, incredible. People are brilliant and they're beautiful, and it's just, and the depth of the spiritual history is so profound. It just, for me at least, I felt it very deeply. But then meeting the Dalai Lama was very funny, because at one point in time, I was just in the background. It was the kids were talking to him. I had zero expectation to interact with him. We were recording it. I was holding the microphone, just, again, in the back of the room. And for some reason, this joke came up, and the Dalai Lama teased me for looking old, essentially. So, it was just a little quick interaction. He was just being kind, but it was one of those moments like, wow, the Dalai Lama just threw shade at me. That's pretty cool. So I had a moment there, and just, again, being in his presence and experiencing his being in that manner, you come out changed if you're in a situation like that, with many people, of course, of that caliber. But in this experience for me, that's what I had. So that trip and going to the orphanage and some of the other things that we did, I came back going, I'm not going to mess around anymore. I'm here. I know what I need to do. So when I get back, I'm going to make some changes. And I think that was probably that pivotal moment. And to answer the second part around, kind of the flash of the scale compassion as my personal mission, we were writing a mission statement for something. I can't remember what it was, but I realized it in this moment of going through this exercise, that it just kind of flashed in front of me. It was very simple, but the notion of scaling compassion as my personal mission just kind of appeared. It just made itself available.
Awesome. Well, we're gonna explore that thread in just a moment. When we come back to another topic you mentioned, another common thread that we have, and since you kind of alluded to it, you've done a lot of work with Madonna as the center, as a school, with children, your own children who are now growing or leaving the nest, quote unquote, have been part of that. How has your experience through this journey that you've described so far affected them and how they are approaching the world?
Well, great question.
I want to hear a little bit about that, explore that, and then we'll come
Sure.
back to what you're doing.
Yeah, no problem. That's a great question. How's it affected them? Well, on a mundane level, startup life can be difficult, right? So, and a little bit stressful. It's not an easy walk all the time. So, there have been times when just the mechanics of it, just me working at odd times and, doing some of that effort that's necessary, that's outside of the prescribed box of saying, like my wife, for instance, who's a very hardworking teacher, but there's a very strict academic calendar, and people are off at the same time, and people are working at you know what I mean? So there's very structured. And then there's me, who's doing all this crazy stuff. And particularly when I'm working with people in Europe or in India, and, I have to deal with these time zones and so forth. So the mundane, the mechanics of it have been challenging at times, and the stresses of it have been present into the family at times as do your best to shield, but sometimes things are just hard.
Real.
When it comes to how, as I'm interpreting your question, kind of how their path is starting to unfold. It's early in the process, so I can't really give a good example to that. I know that they're service oriented, which is nice, and they are very empathetic and in many ways compassionate in their lives. But in terms of, say, their career, I'm not sure. We'll see. It's an interesting thing as a parent, right? So I just want to support them in whatever they do.
Well, I think to your comment, the fact that they are empathetic and compassionate as people, and the work that you've cultivated in them as individuals and people, and what you've shared about them together in the past, I think speaks to your multiplying compassion through your actual family as well. So that's exciting. So well done. So eager to hear more about how that evolves as
Sure.
some commonalities there. So let's come back to kind of scale and compassion. What are you doing specifically? You mentioned some changes that you've made or that you did make and that are now you're seeing that evolve. How are you scaling compassion at the present time?
Sure. Um, Again, great question. So I have a number of different things that I'm working on, and I have to be careful not to get too diffuse in my focus, but at the same time, I just want to pursue these different things. The scaling compassion really can start from supporting practices in a deep internal method, namely at the individual level of self-compassion. And then it can go into simple action in the world through acts of altruism, just to help another without expectation of return.
Mhm.
And then for me, ultimately, on the books, so to speak, it goes also into the world of politics and political action in a compassionate framework. So it starts at the individual and kind of makes its way into group action in the world. So one of the projects that I was the co-founder of, and is a company called Humanize, and Humanize is doing work around really deep internal practice, using something called a dyad and the ability to bring self-awareness to one's day-to-day thoughts and feelings and experiences, particularly how they show up physically in the body. And Humanize is a practice platform that allows people to explore that with others. It's a really wonderful practice inspired by the brilliant, brilliant work of Dr. Tanya Singer. Benevolently is, again, a platform for acts of altruism where you deploy these inside enterprise environments, closed walled garden environments, and you can essentially have opportunities to help people that might be just as simple as expressing gratitude as a practice of compassion, or what I call the gateway drug to compassion. So some sort of practice around gratitude where you might be able to send a text message to a frontline worker and just simply thank them and so forth, all the way through to something more complex that might be involved where you and several other people show up and you're taking care of someone who maybe has broken their hip and they could really use some support getting the trash cans off the curb and feeding the animals and so forth. So there's a range of virtual options within Benevolently to do that. And then Compassion 2.0, which is, again, another professional framed activity. So here, rather than providing the practice directly to the end user, it's a way in which to get to end users indirectly by bringing together a group of professionals like we've talked about and are doing together, which I'm very excited about this, but we'll talk about that later. But the idea there, again, just briefly, is to identify those visionary leaders who are working within organizations to help them bring compassionate practices to their organizations. And again, that would include not just the individual having opportunities for their own self-development and self-compassion, but also organizational principles of compassion. And how does that work? Then finally, another project that I have on the books, probably for 2024, is I set up a chapter of the national organization called Indivisible. And we did some political actions starting in 2017 through 2020, basically. We had about 4,000 people involved in various ways over that time. And it was to have a kind of a compassionate political action group in that sense, where it wasn't about being angry and so forth, but it was about finding ways to engage your fellow citizens and to be able to come to a harmonious discussion and figure out how to maybe tone down some of the division that we're seeing in current political world. So that's now led to a project that we're calling the Common Good, and specifically the Common Good Agency. And the idea is to take repurposed shipping containers and outfit them with digital kiosks and movie projections and all kinds of different things, and be able to set them up in communities and then offer content and interactive capability for people to come together and start to teach people about their community and ways in which that they can be working together. So the idea is just kind of forming, but it's definitely more in the realm of political activity. So I apologize for going on and on, but
oh, that's great. I love it. I love the way you broke that out in the different areas and how that applies to that individual versus group versus collective and the greater good, as you described, the common good. I'm fascinated to learn more about that. That's a new initiative that we haven't really spent much time on. So we'll dig in further on that in the future. But I want to come back to Compassion 2.0.
yeah,
We are collaborating on that.
yep,
LifeGuides is collaborating on that. Rebels of the Heart community is collaborating with that with you.
yep, yep.
Talk a little bit about what that experience, as you envision it, will be for the
Sure,
leaders and the participants that come and represent their organizations and that collective possibility.
sure. It's it's coming together, and I think one of the things that's becoming clear is the conference is being modeled on ultimately what we would like to bring to businesses by themselves, right? So the first conference is to bring the visionary leadership together. So many of the folks that you've interviewed on the Rebels podcast are just brilliant. I mean, they're just amazing. So it's those kinds of people who have the orientation, who are already leaning forward into these practices and into these ideas, that are moving away from kind of the industrial model of human management into a more humane model of human management, which is, for a variety of reasons we can discuss, is what the time is calling for. And when that shows up, again, what's becoming clear is that compassionate practices, I think, really come in three buckets, in particular for orgs. But again, this is something that we all want to explore with all of these other brilliant people, people much smarter and more experienced than me. But as I see it now, it comes in three buckets. The first bucket is teaching people and giving people the permission to have some level of self-compassion and to allow them the permission to be able to start to resolve their own pain, quite frankly. People all have different flavors of trauma and challenges that they face in their life. Everybody does, of course. And I think having the permission to be able to look at those and to unpack that and move through that, I think, is part of the discussion. Another part of the discussion in the second bucket I see is then the relationship from you to other. The notion of how do we have other? Personally, I think othering, generally speaking, in all of its myriad of forms, is our current challenge facing the United States and probably other Western countries as well. Not to say it's not the challenge in other places too, but just to speak to something I'm a little more familiar with. I think the notion of other is our problem. So how do we synthesize other? Because at the end of the day, ultimately, there is no other. We're all in it together and we all have shared traits somewhere. So I think that is part of it as well, part of the discussion. And then finally, I think the third bucket is looking at organizational and what I call operationalizing compassion. How do you translate a compassionate framework into a customer service model? How do you translate that into your supplier models? What are the return on investments in so doing? What are your key performance indicators that you're doing it well? I think there's a fair amount to unpack there. And I think if just the company can have an orientation that starts to incorporate that, not only will they unlock, of course, their supply chain, broadly speaking, whatever that might look like, both externally and internally, but they'll also be able to really create opportunities. And the Google Aristotle Project spoke to this, create opportunities for people to work really well together and to take risks and be safe, in psychological safety, being safe and therefore innovating on new ideas and solving problems, complex problems that people might have been reluctant to do before in an unsafe environment. So that's how it's shaping up to me. I'm not sure if, in fact, that makes sense. You and I can, of course,
Yeah.
will continue to talk about that as our collaborator, if that approach makes sense. But that's how I see it. So I'm hoping the people that come will be able to help us either reframe that and or unpack what that might look like.
Yeah. So first off, thank you for eloquently sharing that. And obviously, yes, that makes sense to me. And what that in essence is what LifeGuides is doing to your comment, that exact design and reversing it is operationalizing empathy, compassion, and a platform for good through self and other connections and the commonality and our shared humanity. So obviously that's why we are founding sponsors and supporters of this vision we're thrilled about it. To provide context, there will be a gathering in Santa Cruz at the Mount Madonna Center this spring, where we'll be gathering these leaders together, from different communities and circles that we're all a part of. Just share a little bit, Carson, about some of the other facilitators and speakers that have already confirmed that will be sharing their insights around outside of myself and Lifeguides and the Rebels community. Outside of that, who are sharing their ideas, their wisdom, their hearts around those three tenets that you just described.
Sure. Well, the first one that comes to mind is Monica Warline, who has been doing a lot of incredible research with Jane Dutton at the University of Michigan and also the Stanford Center for Compassion and Altruism Research. The two of them have written a book called Awakening Compassion at Work, and they've done really a lot of groundbreaking research on compassion in organizations, be it governmental and or business, et cetera. And Monica's work will be framing, excuse me, the conversation starting with that third bucket, I guess, in terms of the operations and the operationalization of compassion. So excited about that. Ruchika Sikri from Google has said that she's going to join and talk about her experience there with rolling out various practices and capabilities to the Google teams. Google has, got all kinds of things going on. They're really very forward thinking about that. Jared Seide and his wife will be coming from the Center for Counsel. Counsel, I call what I call a structure of compassion. Namely, if you put people into counsel, compassion happens because the rules basically are such that there's no other option really. And they've done phenomenal work in prisons and with working with other law enforcement and other environments, but just talking about the notion of counsel, how that can work. We have Lakiba Pittman coming to talk about the myth of other and othering, generally speaking, in terms of how we resolve some of those, some of those different elements. Lori Schwanbeck will be coming to talk about self-care, and Margaret Cullen will be coming to talk about equanimity. So again, we have this mix of tools for the individual, tools for the relationship with other, and then discussions around the organization. And we will have more speakers than that too, because some people have shown up saying, "Hey, I want to, jump in the conversation."
Yeah, I think what you just outlined is, all those individuals have such a high regard and expertise, and just I can't wait to learn from them and learn from the quote others that are there that are also reflections of all of us. So well done in the initiative there and setting that up, and we're really thrilled about it. Where can oh yeah, go ahead, Carson.
I was going to say, I forgot to add one more person. We're getting Derek Lundsten from LifeGuides will actually also be facilitating conversations in the evening and talking about communities of care. He's someone to check out for sure if you haven't already.
Thank you for that. I'm flattered.
Yeah.
So in all seriousness, where can people learn and about the event and the site of Compassion 2.0 and the other work that you're doing as they look to learn more about Carson Kelly?
Sure.
We're doing together.
So Compassion 2.0 is located at compassion2.com.
It's the number 2, right?
I'm sorry. Thank you. Yes, the number 2. So compassion and then the number 2.com. And there you can learn all about the event and register and so forth. Then for me, I guess I don't really have a centralized place outside of LinkedIn, really. So my LinkedIn is, the linkedin.com/in/Carson Kelly 23. So if people are interested in learning more or what have you, that's where I am.
Do you change the number every year to reflect the present, or is that
No, that's a good question too. No, um, I have a philosophical theory about the number 23 and the synchronicities that, William Burroughs talks about, and, a number of different kind of beat poets and other literary types. It's a real nerdy thing. Well, you and I can nerd out on that together at some point, but
awesome?
yeah, so that's why that number's there.
Wonderful. Well, Carson, thank you again for the work that you're doing in the world. Thank you for sharing it with our audience here. We're looking forward to amplifying it together, and just keep up the amazing work.
Yeah, you too. Life Guides is truly amazing and such an awesome thing to be happening in the world. So well done to you and to the community as well. So, and thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure. All right. And to the Rebels audience, we thank you for your time and your contribution to our community and to all that's coming in 2023 and beyond.